The sky over Wall Street was a bruised purple at dawn, the once flickering neon signs of banking halls now dark monuments to shattered dreams. Emma Caldwell pressed her fingertips against the cold plate glass of her family's small savings bank, a place that had stood for generations, and watched as anxious depositors formed a silent line around the block. Each face was etched with the same mounting dread, the fear that tomorrow their life's work would vanish like mist. In 1931, when the juggernaut of bank failures began its ceaseless march, more than 9,000 banks collapsed by 1933, erasing a staggering $140 billion in today's dollars of household savings. Emma's own parents had lost everything in a single weekend. Her father, once a proud foreman, found himself begging for work. Her mother, stoic and gentle, took in mending and washing to keep food on the table. They survived, but at the cost of endless sacrifice and a lesson etched deeply into Emma's heart: security is fragile. Decades later, that lesson burned brighter than ever as Emma's granddaughter, Lily, stared at her first paycheck. The numbers danced before her eyes: rent, utilities, tuition, car notes, every penny promised to someone else before it ever found a home in her pocket. Yet today, her mother handed her a crisp envelope labeled emergency fund. It contained just enough to cover a single month's rent. But to Lily, it felt like an anchor in a stormy sea. "This," Emma said, voice steady, "is your shield against the world's unexpected blows." Across the country in 2025, another crisis simmered beneath the surface. Financial experts warned that 57% of Americans couldn't scrape together $1,000 without resorting to credit or loans. A minor car repair, a surprise medical bill, or an unplanned layoff could tip households into chaos. Lily's generation, raised on instant gratification and digital convenience, had scant experience with true scarcity, but history, Emma reminded her, marches on with cruel impartiality. That night, as city lights flickered and distant sirens sang of urgent calls, Lily resolved to honor her inheritance, not the money itself, but the principle it embodied. She set aside a small sum from each paycheck, sacrificing a few lattes, streaming subscriptions, and impulse purchases. With every deposit she made into her emergency fund, she heard her grandmother's quiet warning echoing across time: build your fortress before the walls crumble. In the end, it wasn't the size of the fund that mattered, it was the peace of mind it bought and the choices it preserved when disaster struck. For Emma, Lily, and millions of Americans, that security would be the difference between weathering the storm with dignity or becoming another forgotten number in history's unforgiving ledger. The grand showroom glowed with chrome and polished mahogany beneath the warm haze of Art Deco lamps. In 1928, Eleanor Swift stood before the latest all-electric radio console, her heart pounding as salesmen whispered of installment plans that made luxury seem within reach. Just a small down payment, they promised, and easy monthly terms. She signed the agreement with trembling fingers, envisioning evenings filled with jazz melodies and the hum of modern convenience. Across town, neighbor families snapped up automobiles with similar ease, trading security for installment contracts that stretched their incomes to the brink. By 1929, consumer debt in the United States had ballooned to $7 billion, money owed on furniture, radios, cars, even exotic vacations promising a taste of the Roaring '20s lifestyle. It was a gilded dream built on borrowed dollars, and like all fragile fantasies, it would come crashing down. When the stock market tumbled in October 1929, the consequences cascaded swiftly. Businesses folded overnight, wages vanished, and credit lines froze. Eleanor's dream radio became a burden. The monthly payments she once met without thought now loomed like an executioner's axe. One harsh morning, a stern-faced repo man arrived at her door, and the console, which had once symbolized modernity, was loaded back onto his truck. Neighbors fared no better. Repossessed cars lined the streets like tombstones of their former prosperity. Fast forward to 2025, The hum of modern televisions and the glow of smartphone screens mask a deeper peril. Today, U.S. consumer debt tops $17 trillion, with credit cards, auto loans, and buy now pay later schemes ensnaring millions. Financial experts warn that one missed paycheck can trigger a cascade of overdraft fees, delinquent accounts, and credit score devastation. Sophia Martinez knows this all too well. After losing her job in a tech startup's sudden downsizing, she found her credit card balances spiraling first with groceries, then with car repairs, and finally with medical bills. Late one night, Sophia sat in her darkened kitchen, the weight of her debts pressing on her chest like a vice. Each ding of her phone was a potential harbinger of debt collectors calling. She recalled her grandmother's stories of the 1929 crash, the repossessions, the destitution, the shattering of dreams bought on credit. Determined not to repeat history, Sophia drew up a ruthless plan: sell underused possessions, consolidate high-interest cards, and negotiate lower rates. She vowed to claw her way back from the brink. In the crescendo of her struggle, Sophia realized that credit is a double-edged sword, a bridge to convenience or a trapdoor to ruin. The lessons of the past, echoed across nearly a century, are clear: debt must be wielded with caution, respect, and, above all, restraint. Only then can one avoid the bitter taste of repossession and the hollow ache of dreams deferred. The dawn sky over Millhaven was the color of tarnished copper, and the town's once busy main street lay silent beneath a blanket of desperation. Currency had become little more than scraps of paper, worthless when the banks closed their vaults and hoarded every last dollar. Grocery shelves stood half empty, the butcher's storefront was dark, but from the shadows of collapse came a flicker of human ingenuity, the art of barter. Old Mrs. Hawthorne shuffled down the street, a wicker basket of fresh eggs tucked under one arm. She paused at the door of Dr. Kellogg's small clinic. The doctor, whose medical degree once guaranteed a comfortable life, now accepted her trade without complaint. In exchange for a dozen eggs and a pot of dandelion tincture, he treated Mrs. Hawthorne's ailing granddaughter, no questions asked, only gratitude exchanged in kind. Further down the block, Mr. Alvarez stacked bundles of firewood at the edge of the general store. Storekeeper Jenkins weighed each log against sacks of flour and jars of lard, tallying in his ledger the shifting value of necessity. When the sun dipped low, children chased one another through alleys, clutching handfuls of potatoes. Teacher Miss Carter's salary for a month of lessons and giggling at the curious new economy that had sprung up in an instant. But barter alone could not bind an entire town forever. As weeks turned into months, Millhaven's leaders convened in the old town hall, its windows boarded against the chill. By candlelight, they sketched designs for a local currency, small wooden tokens, Millhaven Scrip, each hand carved with the town seal and stamped with values in eggs, cords of wood, or bushels of corn. Suddenly, the exchange was no longer clumsy division by barter, but a tidy system resting on shared trust. At dawn the next day, farmers lined up to trade their first sacks of grain for scrip, while carpenters and tailors exchanged services for tokens they could spend at the blacksmith's forge. Truckers carried scrip to neighboring villages, weaving a network of mutual aid that bypassed the dead banks. Children pressed coins of wood into jars, saving them like precious currency, and learning that true wealth lay in cooperation. When outside traders finally arrived, seeking to buy up Millhaven's livestock at bargain prices, the townspeople stood firm. They paid debts in scrip, refusing outside currency and preserving their fragile economy. In that decisive moment when the rest of the world saw only desperation, Millhaven found its resilience. And so, in the crucible of hardship, a community discovered that, when cash fails, the true currency is solidarity, and that by valuing each other's labor and kindness above all else, they could survive even the darkest of times. The early morning sun rose over the cracked fields of Harper County with a hollow promise. Dust swirled like specters across the horizon, and John McAllister stood in the doorway of his withered farmhouse, staring at rows of withered stalks that once promised a bountiful harvest. In 1932, wheat prices had plummeted by more than 60%, leaving him with debts he could no longer repay. Behind him, his wife Clara packed their meager belongings into a battered pickup mail-order catalogs, a rusted plow, and the family Bible while their 2 children clung to her skirts, wide-eyed and silent. As the dust storms roared through the day, more than 2.5 million families like the McAllisters abandoned their farms, chasing rumors of work in distant towns. John's heart pounded with fear. The land he tilled since childhood betrayed him. His identity as a farmer was slipping away. On the outskirts of Amarillo, he found work stacking crates at a produce warehouse, earning barely enough to rent a single room for the family's dreary nights. Yet Clara refused to surrender. She transformed their cramped quarters into a makeshift pantry, drying wild plums and grinding cornmeal to sell by the bulb-lit highway. Neighbors paid for Clara's preserves with eggs or scraps of fabric barter that, to John's surprise, soon out-earned his wages at the warehouse. Before long, they rented a tiny plot at the community garden, planting tomatoes and okra that Clara hawked at the Saturday market. Each dollar they saved was a step away from dependency on one collapsing income. Fast forward to today. Sarah Nguyen, a single mother in suburban Ohio, monitors her bank app as she taps through pending direct deposits. A graphic flashes across her screen. 60% of Americans depend on a single paycheck. She feels a familiar knot in her stomach, the same dread that gripped John in the Dust Bowl. A sudden layoff at her marketing firm could leave her scrambling, just as a drought had once done to the McAllisters. Determined not to repeat history, Sarah cultivates her own safety net, freelancing as a graphic designer on evenings and weekends, tutoring students in math, and growing microgreens on her balcony to sell to a local cafe. Each venture feels risky, but it's also empowering. When her company announces budget cuts, Sarah doesn't panic. She leans on her side hustles, smoothing the gap between paychecks, and preserves her family's security with hard-won resilience. In the echoes of history and the pulse of modern life, the lesson is clear. Relying on a single income is a gamble no family can afford. Division of risk, whether by barley and blackberries or by business and side gig, is the true harvest of stability and the only way to weather both dust storms and layoffs with dignity intact. The sun sank low over the tumble-down homestead, casting long shadows across the peeling paint and sagging porch. Inside, 12-year-old Ruthie knelt beside her mother, Eliza, wrestling with a battered pair of leather shoes whose soles had long since worn through. "Mom," Ruthie whispered, "I don't know if we can make these last another week." Eliza dipped a scrap of cardboard into glue and slid it beneath the worn leather, pressing it firmly into place. "We'll make do," she said softly, tracing the outline of Ruthie's foot with careful precision. "Remember what Grandma used to say, use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without." In the kitchen, the iron skillet sang over a thin drizzle of grease. Eliza boiled peas saved from last summer's harvest. Every pod, every scrap of food, was measured against hunger's relentless gnaw. Across the field, the barn's ragged curtains flapped in the evening breeze, once flour sacks, now stitched into patchwork drapes. Eliza smoothed a hand over the fabric, recalling how 3.5 million children across the Dust Bowl donned dresses woven from the very sacks that carried their family's lifeline. "These seams tell our story," she murmured, gathering the cloth into her lap and carefully sewing a tier with thread plucked from old feed sacks. As darkness settled, Ruthie slipped into her patched shoes and followed her mother to the workshop at the edge of the property. There, Eliza's husband, Henry, stood over a battered radio, twisting knobs and coaxing faint static into music. The family's mantra had become more than words. It was a lifeline in a world emptied of luxuries. Every nail, every piece of wire, every bolt was scavenged, salvaged, and woven back into use. Fast forward to 2025. Marcus Lee, A corporate analyst drowning in credit card debt scrolls through social media feeds of influencers hawking convenience. He pauses at a live stream titled Extreme Frugality Workshop, Dust Bowl Hacks from Modern Life. Intrigued, he watches a presenter patch a leather boot with recycled materials, then breathe new life into a thrifted jacket with simple stitches. Something clicks. Marcus realizes he's thrown away tools and talents in pursuit of ease. The next morning, he visits a local repair cafe, arrives with broken gadgets and frayed clothing, and learns the forgotten crafts of his grandparents' generation. He patches his own shoes, mends a rip in his work jacket, and recycles office paper into notepads. In his small apartment, the mantra "use it up, wear it out, make it do, or do without" now hangs above his repair bench. Debt balances shrink as he consumes less and restores more, finding redemption in resourcefulness rather than rescue. In both eras, the lesson endures. When scarcity strikes, survival belongs to those who transform every scrap into sustenance, every defect into opportunity, and every hardship into hope.